Welcome. Really happy to have you here. My name is Jennifer Franklin, and I'm the program director of the Hudson Valley Writers Center. We're so happy to have you with us tonight as we continue our 2023 reading series. If this is your first time joining us for a reading, welcome. We hope you continue to come to our online readings, classes, and events. Please check our website for the complete list of offerings. We hope you'll come back on Sunday, February 26th, as we welcome Claudia Rankin and Emily Skillings. Tickets are free and donations towards the Writers Honorarium are always appreciated. But tonight, we want to make sure that everyone who's here will buy a book. This is one in the series of anthology readings that have been extremely popular. And as you may know, the Zoom readings have been wonderful, but they haven't been great for book sales. So let's help them translate this Zoom reading into some sales. As always, I want to thank our founder and our founding editor of Slapping Hall Press, award-winning poet Margot Taft-Stever, the board of the Hudson Valley Writers Center, all our teachers and students who are the beating heart of the center. We also want to thank and recognize the foundations and organizations who support us, including the Bidale Foundation, the David G. Taft Foundation, NISCA, and Arts Westchester. Thank you to my colleagues, Christina Papadopoulos and Sophia Bannister and Christy Yarnell, who are all here tonight for all of their hard work. We are so excited to introduce Nana Brew Hammond. She is the author of the children's picture book, Blue, A History of the Color as Deep as the Sea and as Wide as the Sky, illustrated by Caldecott Honor artist Daniel Minter, and the young adult novel, Powder Necklace, which Publishers Weekly called a winning debut. Blue was named among the best books of 2022 by NPR. Brew Hammond was a 2019 Edward F. Albee Foundation Fellow, a 2016 Hedgebrook Writer in Residence, and a 2015 Rhode Island Writers Colony Writer in Residence, among many other honors and residencies and awards. Every month, she co-leads a writing fellowship whose mission is to write light into darkness. Nana teaches at HVWC, and if you don't know her or follow her on social media, you should, and you will soon learn how she brings light, gratitude, and empathy wherever she goes. Please, everyone, help me welcome Nana Brew Hammond.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that incredible introduction and for welcoming us, the relations crew, to the center tonight. We're so excited. I'm so excited to be here and just present this beautiful anthology. I'm just a little bit biased as the editor, but it was just such it is a treasure because it brings together some of the most incredible writers writing today, stories, collections, and essays that really delve into what it means to be a human being on this planet. And a lot of them, most of them really going deep on a topic that we can all relate to, which is relationships. How we relate to each other, how we relate to ourselves, how do we relate to our culture, the relationships that really animate our lives. I had the pleasure of working on this during what's a friend of mine called peak pandemic. I pitched this in August 2020. And what was so wonderful about it was I was really isolated in my apartment in New York City, Queens, New York. And I had it was like I got to be in fellowship with these incredible writers. I tapped my community, writers that I knew that I just really admired their work. I looked at, who are the writers? I read a bunch of books and looked up writers that I hadn't heard of before, that I was really engaged with their work. I also sought recommendations, and the result is 31 writers from across the continent and the diaspora who have really brought the most amazing insights to the page. So without further ado, I want to welcome this amazing cast. These are 6 of the contributors. One is Ayesha Harruna Attah, Chike Frankie Adosian, Dami Ajayi, Fatima Kamara, Reem Ghaffar, and Vanessa Walters. And they will introduce themselves in short order, but I just want to quickly say that Ayesha, Chike, Frankie, Adosian, and Dami are logging in from GMT. Ayesha from Senegal, Chike from Ghana, and Dami from the UK. So they may drop off after they do their presentation so they can get to bed because it's midnight where they are. So without further ado, I will hand over to Ayesha. Thank you so much.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me okay. Good evening to everyone. I'm calling from Senegal, where it's very late, so excuse my grogginess. So I'm a Ghanaian writer, and I've published 5 novels, and I'm at work on a 6th. I live in Senegal, and let's see, what can I say about myself? I like making ice cream and reading. So I'm going to dive right into my story, which is called Nanuman. It's a story that came to me also during peak pandemic, and wrote itself very quickly. So when Nana reached out, I just had the story ready, and it was perfect because it was about a relationship. And it's based on a Malian song that I haven't heard anywhere at all, but that intrigued me so much that I wrote a story about it. The waves of the sea crested and frothed, lapping Nanuman's toes, as Maimuna crouched next to her, selecting mussels from the recycled yogurt tub the vendor had ambushed them with. Nanuman's phone rang, and her heart leapt from its sea-induced calm. They didn't call each other. It couldn't be him, could it? Her screen was too cracked to see who was calling. Still, like an infatuated teenager, she could dream, couldn't she? Hi, Mama, Danny said on the other end of the line. Her dreams, stupid, bubbly things, popped and fell to the sand. Oh, hi, Danny, said Nanuman. When are you back home? Soon, she said, trying to shove irritation into her belly. It was his evening with Isa, hers to breathe, and she told him countless times she didn't like him calling her Mama. Isa wanted to say goodnight to you, said Danny. Tell her I promise I'll give her a kiss when I get home. Nanuman pressed the red button. It was who? Asked Maimuna. Danny. She was sure his name came out flat. She could have tried to inject a little more enthusiasm, but she just couldn't summon it from her body. Bluebeard can't live without you, Maimuna said, satisfied with her muscle pickings. She put the glistening black shells into a plastic bag and stood up. Her gray hair, woven in stunning braids, settled just above her shoulders. Maimuna had always worn her hair out, not wrapped in scarves like most women of a certain age in the village. Does the excitement ever come back? Nanuman asked. I've been married to Buba for decades, my sister. If you don't make it exciting, it'll get even worse. If you're so bored, why don't you come spend the evening with us? I need to get some white wine, some butter, garlic. Buba is cooking and it's going to be. Maimuna smacked her fingers. Nanuman shook her head. It was too beautiful an evening to be stuck making small talk or any kind of talk. She kissed Maimuna bye. She just wanted to feel the sun's last rays on her skin. Nothing on under her dress. As she walked along the ochre and red cliff that hugged the seashore, she relished the feel of her thighs rubbing against each other. She wanted to replay images of her afternoon with Nathan and how just thinking of him diffused electrical pulses from the crown of her head, through her slice in the middle, down the tips of her toes. She wanted to soak it all in, because soon sameness was going to seep back into her life. The sun burned its power into Nanuman's pores, melting all her guilt away. She was glad for destiny, for the story that was inscribed in the glyphs of her name. When Nanuman first arrived in the Sahelian village by the sea, It was to work with Maimuna on a translation project. The contract ended, and Newman stayed and worked on new local projects. It seemed an improbable place for a woman in her early 30s to want to settle. A village with one restaurant, no nightlife, no shops. But there was the sea, solitude, and something that made her feel as if this could finally be home. Her grandmother was Sahelian. Her name was Sahelian. It made sense for her to finally settle in the Sahel after years of traveling and decrypting other people's languages. When she met Danny, camera around his neck, on the same stretch of beach on which she meditated, bought fish, and discussed local politics with a woman selling cloth and beads, the whole thing seemed like destiny. He had bought a house in the village. He was English speaking, and he gave her a break from her job of thinking in other languages. There was something alluring about his being much older than her, especially after her many failed romances with indecisive young men. He took her picture, and it was the most beautiful capturing she'd ever seen of herself. She looked free. In those early days, Danny seemed as energetic as she was. She mistook hours and hours of lovemaking and talking about what the future could look like for passion. I'll stop here and pass on to Chike.
Thank you so much. And if anybody has any questions, you can pop them in the chat, and we'll be checking them out.
Okay, thank you so much, Ayesha. That was beautiful, as is the story. Hi, everybody. Good evening from Accra. My name is Chike Frankie Dozian, and I'm going to be reading from a story called Krife. And this little bit is about the relationship between two women. So thank you for tuning in. Akosua had never celebrated birthdays before she met Lizzie. For the last 4 years, Lizzie had made a fuss about celebrating, and this year was no exception. But this time, it wasn't just drinks at some pub somewhere. It was a high-heeled, slinky short dress and expensive perfume kind of night. So much so that Akosua wondered if Lizzie had something else up her sleeve. Perhaps one of the diners here was a man she was soon to reel in. Akosua looked around the room. The men eating and drinking this Saturday night were definitely all in Lizzie's target demographic, rich and married. And at the moment, they were all being super attentive to the wives or women they were out with. Which one of them would end up in Lizzie's East Legon flat later? Which one of them, Akosua wondered, would after dinner go home and say to his wife that he had some business emergency that had to be handled this Saturday night, only to end up frolicking at Lizzie's for hours on end. Lizzie was beautiful in a classic way that a certain kind of Ghanaian man loved. And she knew it. Lizzie was tall, lithe, fair-skinned with long hair imported from India that she had paid a good sum for. Tonight, Lizzie was ravishing in her form-fitting sundress, bursting with yellow flowers. Her gold necklace shone bright, and the bold pendant that rested just beneath her full breast dazzled. The way this woman squealed and radiated joy, one would think it was her own birthday. She oozed of jasmine, a fragrance that she had recently picked up from her new boss. Many of these men here found her irresistible, and they never seemed to understand how calculated and cold Lizzie could be, how she could easily discard them once she'd had her fill. Lizzie could have any man she wanted at Bistro 22 tonight, and their women would not be able to do anything about it. The only question was, which one? Some of the wives smiled at her in the brief greeting, giving her the kind of smile that ends at the lips and is devoid of warmth. Some hissed and gave her a side eye. Many didn't acknowledge her, even though their husbands looked as Lizzie came in. And some of said husbands gave a quick hello. Many of these married women here tonight wanted to be like Lizzie, statuesque and sexy. And many more hated her for reasons they couldn't articulate. That she lived a life they wanted, perhaps? Maybe it was that she took risk and was in control of her sexuality and her body. Maybe it was the idea that she could take their husbands and discard them so easily that irked some of these so-called Christian girls who hissed at her antics. It wasn't that long ago, after all, when the king of spare parts himself, Nana Dankwa, moved out of his marital home, leaving his wife and 4 children in pursuit of Lizzie. Nana Dankwa is also a pastor at the synagogue church and lives the life of a beneficiary of the prosperity gospel. Well, the rumor was that after he moved into a house in Cantonments, Lizzie declined to move in. Lizzie supposedly told some of her pals something about how happy she was to be a guest star in Pastor Nana's world, but not a series regular. And just like that, she broke it off with him. Pastor Nana has since moved back in with his wife and kids, and everyone at the synagogue pretends like nothing extraordinary happened. I think I'll stop here. Thank you, and pass it on to Dami.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Frankie, for that really beautiful story. Good evening, everyone, again. Unfortunately, I don't have any short stories to read. I've been published. My poems have been published in this anthology, and I would share 2 of those poems. First, I'd like to start by saying a few things about how these poems were also written in the peak of the pandemic itself, and how these poems are really about my own experiences, because 6 months before the pandemic, I left Nigeria, where I'd lived all my life, to seek greener pastures in the UK. And it was shortly after I moved that the pandemic happened. And I saw firsthand how, it devastated the United Kingdom. I mean, I work as a doctor here. I was at the very forefront of what was going on in terms of COVID and its devastation, even though I work in mental health. So I would read 2 poems. One is called Ode to a Discarded Face Mask, and the other is called Queens. So just an introduction of Ode to a Face Mask. It was a poem written to a face mask that was discarded. And I thought it was, at the time, it felt like a beautiful way of reflecting on what was going on in our society. Just a discarded face mask. So this is Ode to a Discarded Face Mask. Dark, like my skin, not black, call it beige or brown, but for its rumpled form, it could have been beautiful. How lonely it must be, velvet brown, to journey from a cotton farm, spin through textile machines, be woven into fabric, malanded by a tailor, for this fate of abandonment. Your fate reminds me of breath and George Floyd lying on asphalt, an American knee weighing against his neck. Perhaps this was the notion that spurred your principal to tug at your fine velvet in a survivor haste for air hunger. Nothing is promised. Your immaculate cut, exquisite stitching, delicate embroidery did not promise the warmth of exhaled air. The future is grim and tragic, lying on the concrete skin to be trampled upon by the insouciant wayfarer. Nothing is promised, not even the grip of the liter picker. So the other poem here is it's called Queens, and it's it's like a breakup poem, really, because also around the time that the pandemic was going on, I just ended a relationship, and there's nothing that is good for a poet like a heartbreak or a breakup. It gets you all fired up and writing. So this is called Queens, and it's supposed to be some sort of like praise song to all the queens, as it were. the queens in my life, the queens that are out of my life. And I take the title of the poem from a song by Patrice, who is a Sierra Leonean German musician. And this song is in his album called Ancient Spirit. In my other life, or in my third life, I am a music journalist, and I often would write about music and take songs. My poetry is like residues of song in a sense. So this is Queens, after Patrice. To the queens of my nickel days, days blood by memory stain. To the queens of my jackal days, days landscaped by sepia dreams. To the queens of my Lagos nights, days pierced by shrilly brass and fast cars. To the queens of my liminal nights, Nairobi nights, Cologne nights, Delhi nights. Nights restive in their nocturnal shifting, nights that spill into crayon dawns. To the queens of my London days, days edge like a bet, days of intense feeling and scarred healings, days interrupted by squeaky train announcements, days trembling from dinner mall, days oystered like a painter's easel, days notched by uncertainties, days weighted with misery's dram, days seasoned with searing pain, days salted with sodium and absinthe, days beaten by monkey wedding drizzle, days welded with grief and duty, days watered with wine and whining, days stretched thin with longing, days of microwave lunches, days of absent queens and promises. Let love songs pour out of radios and let lonesome poets sing the karaoke of memories past. Audit love songs for love, audit love songs for certain words. Thank you. I think I pass the mic back to Nana now, who would take some questions.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Wow, those are just, you read the perfect excerpts as well, and poems as well. Thank you so much for just giving us a taste of your brilliant work. I want to invite the participants, all of the attendees, please pop a question in the chat if you have any thoughts or any questions. And maybe I will ask you, Ayesha, you mentioned that you had never heard the song before, and then you did. What do you think it was about that song that really sort of grabbed hold of you and inspired you to write this beautiful story?
So I was actually doing research for another book, for a book that I've not finished yet on the kola nut. And I came across this song, this Malian song about a woman who leaves her husband for a kola trader and then is taken back by her husband and forgiven for her transgressions. And I found it so refreshing as a song that didn't, throw stones at the woman. She was allowed to have her adventure, and she came back home, came back to her family quite intact. So it seemed to me as a very interesting song from West Africa to just explore, because I think times have shifted a lot. Like, a woman cheating on her husband is looked down upon by like all societies now. It's like not something that is encouraged. But in this song, she was given the space to do that. So I found that really interesting. And I looked for vocal versions of the song, because I found this as I was doing research, and I found one woman singing it, and she was so majestic. So even the way she was presenting it, it almost became like she embodied this woman, and she was singing about her exploits and then coming back to her husband. So yeah, that was it. That was the song, and just not seeing it anywhere else was also strange and interesting to me, I think.
Well, you did an incredible job. It's really masterfully written. I think that you really do feel like you are sort of moving. It's very lyrical in the way you tell it, and some of what you shared is evidence of that, but it's so sensorial. You're moving through like the ochre and red cliffs and the picking of the muscles and the hair, and everything just feels really sensual. and lyrical in that way. So you just did a really great job. I really appreciated that story very much. So thank you so much. Frankie, over to you. Your story, when I was sitting in this apartment reading it, I was just howling. It was just it was so fun to read. And yet you were tackling such intense topics like, girlfriend experiences and hypocrisy in the church and, poverty and all of these different things. So I want to just sort of hear from you a little bit more about like sort of what inspired you to write this story.
So I live here in Accra now, but I first came here in 2008. And I fell in love with this city because it is just exactly what you don't think it is. I grew up not very far from here in Lagos, which is a much bigger, very, very vibrant city. And sort of like what you see is what you get. But I found that living here in Accra, the city's filled with things, but it doesn't seem like it. It's almost as if the city presents one face to you and you have to like flip her around before she tells you the truth about who she is. And there's a lot going on in Accra. And my training is as a journalist, so I notice things. And I notice very beautiful people in this city. But a lot of really beautiful people in this city often have stories behind the smiles that are lived experiences that are not always so pleasant, despite the fact that they have this big smile and they greet you and they just go about their business and everybody's doing something. And this is also a place that presents itself as a very religious place. And in that framework of religiosity, there's many different things happening. And so I wanted to just tell the story of how people are doing everything they can to better their lives, but do it in a humorous way, without judgment. But also we are living in a time where in West Africa, I can say this safely, in West Africa, post-COVID, the economies have not rebounded like many other places have. But even pre-COVID, people were struggling. So we are at a time where we see people are doing just anything to get by. And they're doing it with a smile. And they're doing it even when people judge them for doing it. So that's, in a nutshell, what CRIFE is about.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the story. I think you also just, again, it's such a masterful presentation of all of these sort of, it's like a tightrope walk of like all of the different things that are that I mentioned earlier that you tackle, but you do such a great job. It's very easily digestible. It's really great, really wonderful story.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for bringing all of us together, because the book is superb, and I'm really excited to be in company of not just great people, but some people that I admire so much. So thank you for this.
Thank you also. It was such a pleasure, and I'm so glad you agreed to be part of this. So thank you. So Dami, over to you. Please tell us, one of the things that I really appreciated about your poems is, as you mentioned, they were just music. It just felt like you could, they were just bars, like, I was like bopping to them as I was reading them. And you also, dealt with a lot of different subject matter. So I just wanted, to hear a little bit more about, you talked about, you coming to the UK, like right before the pandemic, and being sort of a healthcare worker and being part of that. How did that impact your creative process, and ultimately the poems that you contributed to this anthology?
Oh, well, it was very interesting generally, because I remember that I was in Nigeria on my way. I'm on my way back from Nigeria to the UK on the 1st of January on a flight, and people were, toasting to the new year in champagne cups and all that. And mean, in retrospect, I now think that it was possible, very possible, that there were people who may not have survived the pandemic who were on that plane, who were also toasting to the new year. But this is what life is, and this is our reality. Yeah, it's very interesting because I walked through the pandemic, and throughout all the lockdowns, I was going to work, riding the bus, and being a Black man. I also was aware of what was going on in terms of how there was some level of people, a lot of health workers who were of the BAME categories were dying. And then there were a lot of conversations around what was really leading to all of this. It's I think the pandemic has taught us a lot more about about the injustices of our society, of our world as a whole. But in all of that, there's still some sort of hope, I guess, for humanity. And I guess that was really what I was trying to tap to in the poems I was writing, trying to humanize things, even inanimate things like a face mask. And it looks like face masks are also going out of fashion now. I hope they do go out of fashion, because there was something about how it also anonymizes us in a certain way, in a good way, but also in a very interesting way, because there were people that I worked with that I never saw their faces until maybe once. And I'm like, oh, this is what you look like, because they wore a face mask through it all. So I felt that the face mask was like a perfect metaphor to reflect on that moment, and also not to forget George Floyd. I mean, the paradox of the fact that we could arrange a civil disobedience in the middle of a pandemic that demands that we keep away from each other. It's just very paradoxical and very powerful. And also still tells us a bit more about what we as humans can do when we come together and when we decide to fight the injustices around us.
Oh, I love that you said that. And that was actually something that was really important to me in putting this anthology together, is sort of bringing a diversity of voices from the continent. We don't all think the same way. We know this, but I think sometimes there is an idea that, like, if you're from this country, or if you're Black, even, we all think the same way. And I love that there is this diversity of voices, of opinions, of stories, of styles, of ideas that all come together to form a whole. Just as you mentioned, it's a great, it shows the sort of possibility of what can happen when we come together, even in spite of the sometimes discomfort of what coming together can do and bring. But I will, if anyone has any questions in the audience, please feel free to pop it in the chat. And if we don't see anything, you are free to stay or go. I understand it is late for you. So thank you so much for logging in from, the other side of today for us on the Eastern Standard Time front. So thank you, thank you, thank you. With that, I want to welcome anyone who just joined or joined sort of midstream. I want to welcome you to this reading of some of the contributors of Relations and Anthology of African and Diaspora Voices. This was a delight to put together because I was isolated in my apartment during the COVID-19 lockdown, and it felt as if I was able to bring the community into my apartment and have fellowship with them. So those of you who heard a taste of what they shared can imagine how amazing it was for me to hear all of these beautiful voices in my head. And I want to, with that, welcome some additional contributors who are on tonight. I want to welcome both Reem, Fatima, Arau, and Vanessa, who will also be sharing their work. And I want to invite you to purchase the anthology, pick it up, and you can read more of what you heard and what you're about to hear. So with that, I'll pass it on to Reem and invite you to share your story.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Nana. And it's a bit intimidating after the first three speakers. So today I'm wearing the color blue, which is the color of the 2018 Sudan Revolution, which is what my story is about. And I'll just jump right into it. My story is about Ustaz Awad, who is in Khartoum, and the event that made him change his mind about being part of this revolution, which was so terrifying for him at first. It was the end of the school day, and the children streamed out of the gates like a swarm of locusts, scattering in all different directions at varying speeds of light. The teachers plotted out among them, avoiding getting trampled by the small feet. They shouted their goodbyes to each other, a few of them getting into a couple of beaten up Toyota Coronas, pooling with each other, and the rest heading in the direction of the main road to wait for public transport. Ustaz Awad lived within reasonable walking distance and usually headed home in the northwest direction, but today he had something to do. He turned in the opposite direction, around the back of the school and across the empty space toward the trees where he had met the boy earlier. Of course, neither child nor wheelbarrow were anywhere to be seen. Ustaz Awad stood under the trees feeling deflated. He wasn't really sure why he wanted to find the boy or what he would have done or said if he had. Did he want to hear a thank you? Of course not. More likely, he wanted to know why the boy wasn't in school, although that wasn't much of a mystery either. There was an abundance of reasons why children are outside the educational system in Sudan. Ustaz Awad remembered reading the statistics recently. Almost 60% of school-age children were outside the system. It was the kind of fact that was stated dramatically in conferences and NGO budget meetings and academic papers, which raised eyebrows and drew gasps of horror, but then was quickly forgotten and pushed to the back of everyone's mind. Ustaz Awad scanned the ground, looking for nothing in particular until he saw it. A piece of cardboard that the boy had been holding. Maybe it had a name or a phone number. He was sure it was the same piece. He reached down, picked it up and flattened it out, turned it this way and that way to make sense of the crooked scribbling and lines crossed out with what looked like a piece of coal. At first, they looked like random scratches, but in a series of straight lines. A seasoned mathematician, however, Ustaz Awad could spot an equation in the blink of an eye, even if he couldn't read the numbers properly. And this was very obviously an equation of some sort. Indeed, it was a Cartesian equation, an 8th grade problem. It was almost complete, but missing a step. No, it was missing 2 steps, one in the middle and one in the end. The one in the end wouldn't help solve anything because of the missing step in the middle. Ustaz Awad stared curiously at the problem for several minutes, wondering, had that boy been trying to solve it? He was sort of the right age, a little on the smaller side. He had obviously been a student himself once upon a time, maybe even in Ustaz Awad's same school. Without thinking too hard, he could remember at least a dozen children who had stopped showing up to his 8th grade class, mostly because their families couldn't afford to keep them in school anymore. He looked around. Where had the boy gone? Where had he come from? Where did he live? Looking back down at the problem, he reached into his shirt pocket for his Bic pen, inserted the missing steps, and solved the problem. It was a difficult problem, quite advanced for an 8th grader. And the steps written down here were, for the most part, accurate. This was a smart kid, and he was beaten up and hungry, pushing a wheelbarrow around for an income, carrying this maddening burden of this unsolved math problem around with him in his head. The hot, dusty afternoon breeze brushed against his face, rustling the trees over his head and the piece of cardboard in his hand. Ustaz Awad wondered why there was so much misery in this world, and why the vast majority of it fell on the small heads of children, especially in this country. He looked down at the problem, thinking it over in his head. It didn't take long for him to decide. He would find the boy and show him how to solve the problem properly. And then he would figure out why he was pushing a wheelbarrow for a living instead of staying in school, especially at such a crucial school year. He wasn't exactly sure what he would do next, but he would cross that bridge when he got to it. I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to Fatima to read your poem.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, I think so. Okay. My name is Fatima Kamara. I wrote a poem for the anthology, and this poem focuses on churai, which is basically traditional incense in Senegal and Gambia, is what we call it. And it just came because I was talking with some friends and we were very angry about how people talk about the smells of African homes. And this poem just kind of came out of that. And so I'll just get to it. Bring out the churai, the scented wood, that wet seed, herbs, plants, and oils burned to mask my mother's cooking. All the kids used to laugh, cover their nose at the scent, but their parents buy incense at the tobacco shop in the name of aromatherapy. Fake oils, fake bamboo set ablaze, trying to match what has grounded my people for hundreds of years. Bring out the churai. Back then, I knew nothing about ritual. When you are young, confused, and see no connection to what has brought you, you cannot understand the dedication to the burning of bark, dried flowers, and resin. How after cooking, we spark. On Fridays, we spark. When visitors come, how we attempt to mirror Gambia and conversations on the foyer of the compound. When all we have is silence, when the entire house is clean, when we grieve, bring out the churai, in honor of the time my mother was missing warmth and sand the most. So she sparked, the smoke filling the home and once cleared, gifted my mother a memory. And in turn, she gifted me a story of land and dry heat. My head on her pregnant belly, hoping the same true, that the one who rubs this belly the most is who the baby becomes. How mistaken I was to see dirt instead of a beginning, to not see them as one and the same. Bring out the churai. Sing me the melody I grew up on and in turn sang to my sister when she was teething. Ionini tuti, while the smoke traveled and became part of Tutu baby Miriam. She sucked and nibbled on my knuckles. I only need tutti. We cradled each other and found Tutu baby Miriam. Comfort. Ayo. And all we could smell, nay, nay, was home. Nay, nay. Tutti. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to invite Aral to read.
Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. Before I start, I just wanted to say, Fatima, thank you for writing that poem. It reminds me so much of being in high school and my mother cooking fish with groundnut sauce, or people call it peanut butter here in the US, and having that same reaction in the cafeteria at school with the different smells and seasonings that were unfamiliar to my classmates. So that poem really resonated with me. So thank you for writing that. Okay, I'm going to read from my short story called Atat. Atat means grandmother in my language in Lango. I'll just start from the beginning. When I heard the sharp rhythmic snip snip of stainless steel scissors, each blade taking turns, cutting the thick, warm air and Aya's black curls, I knew someone had died back home. After a phone call from Uganda, my mother had gone from the closed door of her bedroom to shut herself in the bathroom and shear her hair. I've learned to loathe long-distance phone calls, avoiding buying phone cards for my mother from the store around the corner, pretending to have forgotten so that she would have to buy them herself. I'd put the 2 folded $5 bills on her mahogany nightstand, unspent, and walk away quietly. I couldn't bear how so-and-so made Aya worry. Usually so-and-so needed school fees or medicine. Sometimes so-and-so needed to renovate their house. Even though Aya sold her house and some of the family land to pay for documents and buy plane tickets for all 4 of us to join Papa in America. We lived in a small apartment that my parents did not own. They had to pay the landlord on the 1st and the 15th of the month, or get evicted. I didn't want to know who was sick or worse. I didn't want to know who Aya needed to send money to for 2 burials, the traditional one and the Christian one after the other in no particular order. I wondered if the dead cared, if the sayings of elders or the 23rd Psalm actually warmed their bodies. Aya said all of it matters, but I don't know. I didn't like seeing mother worry herself into another headache. It's only year 2 in America, and this was the second phone card conversation that ended with Aya locking herself in the bathroom to cut her hair after her hand steadied from the shock. She took a razor to shave the rest. Back home, Atat and my aunties greeted death with scissors to their hair too, whether it was uncle or grandfather or a neighbor who had a stillborn child. A line of round shaved heads lined up one by one to meet at dawn with plates of cooked food, cakes, and condolences. They would come again at night with more saucepans of food and jugs of mango juice, each woman taking turns to visit, never leaving the main mourner alone. The length of a woman's hair would tell you what was happening in her life. But we are in America now, where a girl with a shaved head would get made fun of for looking like a boy. Who is it this time? I asked Aya, waiting for an answer I knew I wasn't going to get right away. Whenever someone passed on, my mother took her time telling me whom we'd lost. She said I was a kid, her way of saying when the time is right. Aya turned her head slowly, as if it was heavy on her neck. We've only been in this country for 2 years, and already you've forgotten how to greet? Sorry, Aya. Good morning. Good morning. Who is it? I tried again, defiance bubbling up inside me. My mother and you share the same stubborn spirit, Aya often told me. Atat lives in my house. Little firewoman, she would sing over me. Tough pumpkin seed, my firstborn girl. Make sure you walk Atim and Okello to the bus stop, Aya said. As if I didn't walk my brother and sister to the bus stop every day. Does Papa know? Then straight to school, she continued. Make sure you sit at the front in all your classes. Don't open your mouth too much. But Aya, at school here in America, you have to talk a lot, or they think your head is empty. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Aral. It was beautiful. And I will pass it on to Vanessa.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you, Aral, for that beautiful reading. It really made me think, listening to you about the things we take with us. In this case, it was, the culture of the haircutting that, but, it could be anything, things that we take with us that sustain us wherever we go. In my story, which is the Lagos Wives Club, Simone has moved to Lagos as the wife of a Nigerian man, and she's been living there some years. This story is very inspired by my own experience as a Niger wife living in Lagos. And I think in this particular story, Simone is also thinking of the things that sustain her while she's there, separated from her family. Okay, I'll just start reading. Their time in Nigeria was only supposed to be temporary. When Priye had asked Simone to move to Nigeria for a few years, she had agreed without thinking about it too much. She just had a baby. He made it sound fantastic. Their lifestyle would be better, more space and staff too. He would be working for his father, getting the opportunity to start his own business, so he would be around more. Their son would get to grow up in Nigeria, an African man. but a few years had become 7 in the blink of an eye. There were 2 boys now, alongside the apartment that looked out onto the lagoon, and the nanny, the steward, and the driver. Priye wouldn't hear about moving back to the United Kingdom, so there they were. She sighed. He would never leave Nigeria again, not permanently. He was home. She tried to make it her home too, a poetic narrative about being a descendant of slavery circling back to the home of her ancestors sustained her at first. But 7 years later, she still felt like a visitor, a foreign object. She would never be of this place. The conversations about moving back to the United Kingdom became heated arguments. Priye poked at her relationship with her mother and sister. The family she was crying about was dysfunctional, he reminded her. Wasn't she glad to be away from them? He couldn't understand why she would want to leave a life of servants and sunny days to go back to dreary London, where you cleaned up after yourself and had to jump on the tube every day to face the endless grind of the 9 to 5 and racist white people. He didn't see any reason to live anywhere else, certainly not the United Kingdom, where people were as miserable as the weather. It wasn't a country for Black people, he said. He spoke more vehemently than Simone had ever known him to, and she wondered if he was shouting at her or himself. He seemed to be out to prove something about all the times he'd been overlooked at work in London, or feared by white women opting not to share a lift with only him, all the landlords who wouldn't rent to him, and the taxis that didn't stop, that there wasn't something inadequate in him after all. Years of ignoring and dismissing her had made Priye unable to see or hear Simone. She was the problem, he said. It was all in her perspective. She asked if they could try couples therapy, but oh no, he was an African man who didn't need that useless rubbish. Priye hadn't always taken himself so seriously. He had laughed about bringing swim shorts to Idawari's water birth, and he stuck up for her constantly carping mother, trying to build a bridge between them. But now he was haughty, closed off, hard to talk to. If she got upset about something, he was dismissive. There are no victims in this house. And things had taken a turn for the worse after she'd caught him in a lie about his whereabouts. He laughed when she said a friend saw him in the Sheraton Hotel in Ikeja when he claimed to be in Abuja. You women are always seeing ghosts. They all changed, complained Genevieve, before she left Nigeria for good last summer. For more than a year, Genevieve had been obviously depressed, griping about how awful everything was, the economy, the mold in her apartment, the theft of jewelry by her house girl, her children's substandard tennis instructor. Finally, she admitted the problem was her husband having women on the side. Before she went back to the United States, they'd held a somber tea party for her, a kind of wake, because although she'd promised to visit every holiday, they knew they'd never see her again. I'll leave it there.
Wow, thank you all so much. Each share was just in and of themselves were just so powerful, and we're going to get into a little bit more, but there is a question in the chat that came for each of you. So I wonder if you would just briefly share a little bit about your writing process. Maybe we'll start with Fatima, and then whoever wants to sort of bounce off of what she says, take it from there.
My writing process is non-existent and frustrating. I wish I had a process when I was younger. I did have a process. I would think on, what it is that I was feeling, and like the root of that, like the root of whatever feelings I was kind of carrying. I was a little bit of an angry teenager. And then when I would focus on those feelings, I would imagine like if the feeling was like separate from myself and could like talk, what would the feeling say versus like me who was like trying to either sugarcoat or didn't feel brave enough to say something so raw in myself. So if I like separated the feelings and gave it its own personality, what is it that I could say? And so that was like what my writing process was younger. But then as I got older and would write, I was like, oh, like I'm talking, even though I'm frustrated here, being raised across cultures, because that's what I write a lot about. I'm also writing about people I love. I'm writing about experiences that are, yes, my own, but are experiences that I share with people I love too. Not all the stories are just mine. And so it stalled the process. It sometimes it's just like, am I brave enough to, tell the truth? Or and then I lean into different things, right? Like, is this a poem where I really need to think about my culture? Is this a poem that I really need to think about myself as a woman? Is this a poem where I need to think of myself, my Muslim identity? So sometimes I think about what is being asked of me, and there's no process there. So that is my answer to that.
I love that. And I'll circle back to something that you said that really intrigued me, which is this idea of like the stories that you write or like to write about are shared, and how do you sort of break free from the feeling of sort of responsibility to protect versus the responsibility of telling the truth. But I'll circle back to you on that, because I think it's something that all of us can talk to a little bit. But I wonder, would any one of you would like to share a little bit about your writing process? Give us some tips for the fellow writers in the audience.
Well, I was just scrolling as Fatima was talking, because I keep a lot of things on my notes, on my computer, and it's synced to my phone. And writing for me, the Lagos Wives Club, and my novel, The Niger Wife, really was born out of these little notes that I would take, where I would just note something interesting, a line that I heard that stayed with me. And I, at that stage, not knowing it was going to become a novel, but all these notes have really been jump off points for me, as over the years, like 6 years that it has taken to this point. So yeah, I think just like writing down anything you can, and then, I don't know if that's a process, but that's something that helped me, those little notes.
I love that. That's really helpful, because in some ways, what I'm hearing is that, sometimes as a writer, if you're trying to write a big piece, if you're trying to write a novel, it can feel so intimidating thinking about like the big novel that's got to be 80,000 words or more. But this idea of just sort of writing down, taking down notes and using them as jump off points, as you said, is really helpful to me, because it makes it feel more manageable to think of it in that way. But does anyone, would any of you like to add more about your process as a writer, or how you approach writing?
So
Sorry, go ahead, Green.
thanks. I don't have much to say actually, because I don't really have a process. But I do agree with what Fatima and Vanessa were saying. And I think everyone does this differently, because I think writing is a different thing to different people. That's why people approach it in a different way. And it's why you write is different, and what you write and how you write. For myself, like I said, there's no process. I just sit down and type, and then it just comes out. Some people are like that. But for me, the main thing is the things that I see. I'm a very sort of visual person. I observe a lot, and I I've made this habit of looking at things that are very ordinary or things that people don't really look at. Like, the random person standing on the side of the street, the shopkeeper. And it comes to me, all these questions. What are they thinking about? Or what kind of problems do they have back at home? Or what are they thinking about doing next? And then just observing that, because I have a very dramatic life, it all comes, with that. I mean, for example, yesterday I was coming home, I went to pick up my kids from school, and when I was leaving, I live in this apartment building, I saw this this old lady. I don't know who she is. Obviously, she lives in the building, and she brought these books and put them next to the mailboxes. There's this table there where people put some stuff. So I went and I got the kids. When I got back, I went to just look at the books that she dropped off, and there were like maybe 10 or 12 books there, and they were all about Alzheimer's and dementia. And they're not medical books. They're books about how to, deal with an Alzheimer's patient, how to, my journey with dementia, that kind of thing. And she just dropped them off and walked away. And then later, while I was thinking about it, I realized that these are books that maybe belong to her, and that the person who had dementia was someone, most likely her husband, who had passed away, because obviously she didn't need these books anymore. But she had needed them, all of these books. There were so many of them for just that one thing. And she needed them for quite a while, and now she doesn't need them anymore. So that there is just a story with a background and who they are and what kind of a life they had together, and what she's going to do now, and how she feels in this house where the person is not there anymore, just all of that. And then that just turns into a story somehow at 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone is sleeping, and I'm just typing. So that's a process.
It is. Thank you so much for sharing that, Reem. Aral, what about you? What is your process?
Thank you for sharing that, Reem. Also, Fatima. My process has to deal with a lot of photographs. And also, my mother, before she passed away, she weaved baskets. So I have all of these half-done baskets, and I don't know how to basket weave. That's still something I want to learn to do. So if any of you know how to do that, please show me. But just all these things that are from home, whether they're photographs or half-weaved baskets or needles or anything, buttons that my mother owned. Essentially, I kind of use those as, I wouldn't say prompts, but as inspiration or it'll trigger a memory. And so I find myself writing short stories or even poems that come from these inanimate objects that, I'll build from them. But I find myself looking at old photographs, and sometimes it's not just photographs of my own family, but also just photographs of friends, and traveling back and forth when I go home to Uganda, just especially the photographs of the marketplace or women selling mangoes on the street, or women with babies on their backs and riding a motorcycle, it's that you see a lot of in northern Uganda. So just pulling from these photographs and pulling from these memories, and also kind of creating my own memories. Something that Fatima brought up earlier was living cross-culturally, living across cultures. So I'm really fascinated with people who have lived across cultures, whether it's in different countries or different continents, but also within our home countries, whether they're from different, your father and mother from a different tribe or speak different languages, and just kind of navigating that and figuring out where you belong, and migrating between the two communities. So I think that's where a lot of my writing comes from, or at least a lot of my anxiety comes from. So I just really enjoyed listening to everyone's stories. And Fatima, I really enjoyed your poem. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you all so much for answering that. I think the writers in the room really appreciated hearing a little bit about how you approach your writing process. I wanted to ask specifically about the work that you contributed to this, because each of them were so so specific and so immersive. And I really enjoyed all of them. But I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you came to write specifically about the topics that you did. I'll start with what you wrote, Arao. I almost called you Atat. I was like, no, Arao, because you you really you bring us into the sort of tension of what it is to be living, in another country, but being from another country in a really interesting way. I love that you sort of opened it with like a phone card like a phone call and the phone card, and how you sort of like take us through things that are so specific to that experience of being, of living, abroad, but those little details that that you might not, people maybe outside of that community might not get. So I wanted to know a little bit more about like why you chose to approach expressing that experience in that way.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think I approached it in that way because growing up in the US in high school, I grew up in an immigrant community, not specifically an African immigrant community. I had friends who were Lebanese, who are Indians, who are Ghanaians. I ate a lot of Nigerian jollof rice. So people from different countries, different continents. But the thing that we all had in common was buying phone cards. That was something that you had to do to call home. This was before WhatsApp and all of these cool apps that we have right now. So I kind of wanted to open it from there. And I because that's just something I realized it doesn't matter which immigrant community you go into. I live close to a Bangladeshi community here, and I can always find phone cards, right? So I wanted to open it with something that was not just familiar to African immigrants specifically, but also just kind of, something that's kind of universal for all immigrants, whether it's going to the international food store to find where you can buy that big bag of rice that your mother asked you to go buy, just certain things that you will, quintessentially find in any immigrant community. I thought that was important to kind of include that in. And just talking to friends and just trying to figure out, what are the little pieces, small details that kind of connect us together, like phone cards, like figuring out the markets that sell these spices and foods that we can't find anywhere else, that I have to drive all the way to Washington, D.C. to find. Just those little things, I thought those were really important to kind of capture. They're very small details, but they're very important details.
I agree. Thank you so much. The chat is lighting up with questions, so I will defer to the chat. So one of them asks, how was your experience working with me on this? I mean, you can be brutally honest. I don't mind a bit. And the question is particularly on the cultural aspect of the African diaspora. What was it like working with me? Any of you?
Is that question to anyone specific?
Yeah, any of you.
I actually loved working with you, Nana. For me, so I wrote poems since I've been writing it.
I think we're losing you a little, Fatima.
But I started writing. Oh,
yeah, it's still okay. Maybe you're back now.
oh, okay, it's fine now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote this short story, and at the time when I was a kid, I didn't realize I was actually writing about like my parents and the disillusion of their marriage and things like that. And which I almost didn't say, which goes back to my whole thing about the things we actually want to share and what we're protecting, because the shared stories. But I tried to, for this process, be like, no, I'm going to write a short story. Like, I'm not going to submit a poem. And so it ended up not working out because it is actually very hard to switch up. You don't just write poems and then go, oh yeah, I'm going to start writing short stories. It's not like a transferable skill. It's actually a very humbling process. So hats off to all you short story writers. But what I really appreciated though was how open you were to reading and editing and critiquing the thing that I don't find myself to be skilled in. And I just felt like, look at this stranger, pushing this African girl's pen. Like that's how I felt. Obviously, we didn't go with the short story. That didn't happen, but it was a moment for me where it was like I did have something there, and it's still something that I'm working on, and that I've wanted to work on too, and I just needed like a reason or someone to just be like, it was you being open, your communication being prompt, and yeah, I thank you for it. I feel very grateful to just be able to be in a book with so many talented writers.
Well, you're one of them, so thank you. I will, just in the interest of time, because we have about 10 minutes left before we have to wrap up, but I wanted to ask you, Reem, because you bring a story that is told from the perspective of a male protagonist, and it is so. What I love about your story is that it is so specific to his experience as a man, and there's so much sensitivity to it. And I wanted to just get a sense from you of like how you got that so right.
I have no idea, actually. The thing is, writing is it's a very intensive thing, sort of an intense thing for me, just kind of putting myself in that place and writing. You just kind of, you are the person. This is a bit cliche, but when I'm writing as a person, I am that person. I put all my feeling into it. And it kind of happens. It's a bit, I don't know if you, I am a physician, or I used to be a clinician, and then I transitioned to public health. And this was one of the things that was very difficult for me. That's why I transitioned out of clinical practice. I used to be an emergency medicine physician. And then because every single patient I would see, or every single situation I was in, I would be that person. I would feel the pain and I would feel the loss. And it was very difficult when, we would lose the patient, or if I misdiagnosed, which happened, unfortunately, not too often, but it happened enough. Just kind of experiencing all of that at the same time from all these different perspectives. And that's the way. It's a good thing when you're writing, because you kind of get you see the product, as in all of this, you kind of get it, you hope you get it right, but it's not very pleasant otherwise. So I remember it because, especially during the Sudanese revolution, the latest one, during all these protests, and you see all these people coming out, and they're getting, police are shooting at them and people are dying and stuff. And then when you look at the crowd, it was every Monday and every Thursday, and then every Monday and every Thursday you look, and I had to follow that on my mobile phone because I wasn't there at the time. And you see all these people, and then you see all these little ladies and these men in their suits, and these other people with their bags, and it's like they just wandered into the crowd but they are part of the process, the protest, and they are there because they believe in this change. But if you see them on the street, you would never imagine that about them. But like this teacher, he's a very non-confrontational person. He doesn't want to get into trouble. He obviously doesn't want to get shot at. He doesn't want to lose his job or anything. But you just reach that point where you have to do it. And just coming from that extreme of extreme fear or extreme not wanting to be there to the other extreme is just a process that I find the most dramatic. And it's why very ordinary people do very extraordinary things, even though they're just very ordinary people. They're like your garden variety person, just like any of us. So just trying to get into that mindset is I don't know how it happens. It just happens. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that somebody wrote, Cindy Beer, Fuhi writes, yes, empathy as a writer. And I think that deep empathy really shows in your work. So thank you so much for that. And I'll turn it, maybe the last question over to Vanessa. Vanessa, your story was, I saw Arao laughing, and some of us were laughing at some of the things you said. I was laughing too. It felt like hearing it afresh because there was so much, it was so relatable. It was so, I don't know, it just felt so like natural and easy, but yet I know that writing itself, I mean, like, did it just come so easily to you to write that? Yeah, because it just felt so easy, so conversational, like we're just talking to a friend about like, oh gosh, this is what my husband's doing. How did you sort of tap into that, and was it difficult for you?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it did probably come out very easily, just like it was relatable for anybody here, was relatable to me. Things that, I've heard, snatches of things that I've heard, emotions that I've witnessed. And so, yeah, I think that is sort of, especially being from a community of Niger wives for so many years, you get to see, I suppose, your own experience through so many different perspectives. But I think it's definitely your editing, your tilling of the soil that perhaps makes it seem it come together, more coherently. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I think I just want to quickly piggyback to ask you one more question about your story, which one of the things that I really liked about your story is that, and you touched on this too, Arao, is this idea of you can be a Black person in a Black country and still feel wildly out of sorts, or like not of the place or of the people. And I think your story really sort of exemplifies that kind of the nuance of identity in that way. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you, why that it was important to you to write about, and how you approached sort of putting that together in this story.
So I think I sort of had an assumption, and it's just interesting, like reading everybody else's stories as well. Like, it's like I'm going the other way, right? They're coming this way, I'm going that way. But having that assumption that I would be sort of at one, having that assumption of myself as an African, and then arriving and realizing that a lot of the ideas don't necessarily translate, on when you're on ground. One very obvious example for me is that as soon as you arrive in a place like Nigeria, people want to know where your village is. People want to know where your father's from. Your identity is linked to your patriarchal line, something even that some Nigerians have an issue with as well. But these are the questions that come at you, and you instantly start to be challenged on yourself as You know, how can you be an African if you're not from anywhere in Africa that you can point to, if you don't have a village, if, you know, if you don't know where your father's from. So, you know, I think that was very sort of destabilizing in my identity, but then it's just changing, right? You just find yourself in a different way. But I think that these were like big shocks to me that I'd never thought about before.
Well, I could talk to all of you for another few hours. You're all so brilliant and so talented and so inspiring. And I was truly inspired just sort of being able to kind of connect with your work, you know, and so I just want to thank you for trusting me to be your editor and being part of this journey with me. And I want to thank everybody who logged on. I want to just encourage you. This book is a true treasure. I say that because I had the privilege of sort of reading these works firsthand, and I was so moved and so inspired by them. And I think you will be too. And I think you'll learn a lot, no matter where you come from, because, you know, I'm a Ghanaian American, and just reading other stories that were set in Ghana were eye-opening to me and very interesting to me. And I think that, you know, these stories and these essays and these poems really sort of invite us into, you know, the acceptance that we don't all have to think the same way, be the same way, experience the same way, but that we are all experiencing. And there's something so beautiful about that connection and that relationship. So I invite you all to get a copy and enjoy this journey for yourself. With that, I'm going to thank Jennifer, Franklin, and Sophia, and Misty, and all the team at Hudson Valley Writers Center for just approaching us and saying, like, how can we support you? This is the way you support us. And I'm so thankful for you doing that. And thank you for hosting us.
Thank you so much, Nana. Could we ask you one question? I saw in the chat come in that Amanda Zoran is a teacher of 8th graders, and she's about to teach them blue next week. And she anticipates that they're going to want to know when you realized that you wanted to be a writer. And if you could just maybe end the evening telling us a little bit about yourself, since you've been spending your whole night promoting other people's work. We'd love to just hear a tiny bit from you on that.
Oh, thank you so much. Amanda, thank you for your question. I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was very young. My parents, we would go to like family parties or like family friends' houses for parties. And in the bedroom where they would throw all of the coats, I would just like find an empty spot and I would be writing. And that was me from very young, I think. But when I sort of felt that it was something that I could pursue and that I wanted to try to pursue was when I was a sophomore in college. My sister, for my birthday, came up to visit me, and she gave me a journal that had a picture of a wild woman. She had crazy hair. She was surrounded by cats and books. And the title of this journal was Bookwoman. And my sister said to me, I know that, it's you're afraid to say it out loud, but you can do this. And it felt like this permission that she was giving me. And from there, that was when I just knew that I needed to figure out how to be a writer. So that's when.
Thank you so much, Nana. Thank you all for your wonderful readings, for contributing to this anthology. And thank you to our wonderful audience for being here tonight. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Please, if you can, buy the anthology and also post about it on social media. Tell your local librarian and bookstore to order it, because all of these ways really help the writers in the book. So thank you so much. We hope to see you back here on Sunday, February 26th for Claudia Rankin and Emily Skillings. Thank you all. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.